Chapter 55, in which Parker Haddaway tells all. Almost. The church is that way, I said to Parker, as we walked out of Garland's hotel and she turned the wrong direction. We're not going to the church, she said. So I shrugged and followed her in the opposite direction, toward the medieval town hall. Okay, I said, jogging a little to catch up. But you've got to tell me what's going on. Who is Jonas? Where are you going? Parker didn't look at me, but said, Jonas is Garland's banker. He's moving some money into an account for me. Okay, I said, hoping she'd elaborate, but she didn't. So I asked again, Where are you going? I'm not going anywhere, Edwin Green. We passed a couple of girls younger than us, sharing a cigarette, and when we reached the wall, we walked along the ramparts, stopping at a turret to look out over the town. Cars below navigated roundabouts to cross the two flag-draped bridges over the Veer, and on the far side of the river, a train pulled into Gare de Saint-Lô. So you're staying here? I asked. In Saint-Lô? Parker waited on the train's whistle to stop blowing and said, No, but I'm staying in Europe, at least for a while. I told you, Garland promised me a new life. Well, this is it. I'm not going back to America. I'm never going back. There had always been a mysterious quality to my relationship with Sadie Evans. I didn't pursue her. I didn't ask her on a date. But one Sunday night after church, I found myself making out with her behind the counter of Hornby Christian Fellowship's coffee bar. It used to freak me out that something like Sadie and me could materialize out of nothing, because I knew it could disappear just as easily. Edwin, don't ruin the best times of your life trying to figure out when they're going to end, Sadie used to tell me, when I'd lament that there were no guarantees we'd always be together and as happy as we were then. If you're happy now, then be happy, she'd say. And after she left, I told myself if I were ever happy again, I'd stop trying to predict the future and just let myself be happy. Even so, after the last few days with Parker, I couldn't help but make a handful of assumptions about our future together. And though I hadn't had time to discuss these assumptions with her yet, I can tell you they did not involve her staying in Europe and me going back to Hornby. What? I said, my heart jumping into my throat. No, you've got to... Edwin Green, I owe you an explanation, she said, and motioned for me to sit next to her on a stone bench. I hesitated, then sat, and she said, Remember when I told you I'd lived with 7 different relatives in the last 4 years? Yeah? Well, I never told you why, Parker said, and stared up a fluttering blue and yellow municipal flag before turning to me and saying, It's because I killed my parents. You killed... Wait, what? I killed my parents, Parker said. Then noticing the look on my face, said, God, Edwin Green, I didn't murder them, but I'm the reason they're dead. I don't understand, I said. And after a long silence, Parker spoke again, but she wouldn't look at me, which wasn't like her at all. She just stared out over Saint-Lô and said, My parents weren't married when Mom got pregnant. She was in college, majoring in Irish literature, and Dad played bass in a band. This awful rap rock ska band called Flaccid Confederacy that was somewhat famous in Central Florida, but only because their 300-pound drummer played in a gigantic cloth diaper. I laughed, but Parker still wouldn't look at me. When I was born, Dad quit the band to take care of Mom and me, she said. He worked at Disney World for a while. He was one of the 7 dwarves, but they fired him after he kicked a kid who wouldn't stop pulling on his beard. After that, he bounced around construction jobs for a year before joining the army for the insurance and a steady paycheck. That was 2002. and they sent him to Iraq the next year. Parker laughed to herself and said, I was too young to remember his first deployment, but when he went to Iraq the second time, I was 7, and I gave myself stomach ulcers worrying about him. I was in the hospital for a week and had to see a counselor until he came home. The Army deployed him again in 2011, this time to Afghanistan. And before he left, Dad sat me down and explained that he had a desk job. I sit at a computer all day and order food and toilet paper for all the other soldiers, he told me. You don't have to worry about me because I have the safest job in the Army. So I didn't worry about him. And one morning after breakfast, he walked out of the mess tent and a sniper shot him in the stomach. He died en route to the hospital in Germany. I slid over and put my arm around her and said, I'm so sorry, Parker. She looked at me and said, if I'd never been born, he would have never joined the damn Army. He'd be alive and he'd still be in that terrible band doing what he loved. Had this been a movie, an angel would have appeared to show Parker how much worse life would have been without her. But no angel appeared, perhaps because she was at least partially right. Had she not been born, her dad would have never joined the Army. Although I sort of doubted he'd still be the bassist for Flaccid Confederacy. I tried to console her and said, Parker, that's not... But she wasn't finished. We lived in a little town outside of Orlando, she said, again looking off into the distance. And it was big news when they flew Dad's body home for the funeral. I guess any time a soldier from a small town dies, it's big news, at least in that small town. Mom didn't want to tell me about the protesters, but I saw it on the news, so she just said that there might be some bad people at Dad's funeral, and I decided I'd be ready for them. Protesters? The Omaha Prophetic Presbyterian Church. Oh God, not them. The world is a stage, Edwin Green, but the play is badly cast. Parker, I'm so sorry. She waved off my condolences and said, they weren't at the church service, but on the drive to the graveside, our motorcade went right past them. Mom told me not to look, but I did. They screamed at every car that passed, and one little girl about my age spit on the hearse. The city wouldn't let them get closer than 1,000 feet, but when the preacher got up to say a prayer, you could hear them chanting. Then the bugler played taps, and they chanted even louder, and that's when I lost it. I jumped from my chair and took off toward the protesters with at least 20 people from the funeral chasing me. It's funny, there were only about 10 prophetic Presbyterians at the protest. I'd expected there to be hundreds of them, but I guess it's hard to find that many homophobic lunatics free on a Tuesday morning. I recognized the tallest one, with the long beard and funny hat. It was Jeff Perkle, Raymond Perkle's son, who'd transitioned his dad's church from fearmongers to hate-mongers. When I got close, he smiled, and he reached out like he was going to pick me up, like I was his daughter and I was running into his arms. He didn't see my mom's steak knife until it was 3 inches into his thigh. Wait, that was you? I remember that. It was huge news. That was me. But that girl's name wasn't Parker Haddaway? No, it was Emily Bloom. You know what Andy Warhol said about the future? Yeah, that everyone would be famous for 15 minutes. Right. Well, that soup can loving bastard failed to mention that in the future, everyone would be famous for 15 minutes, whether they want to be or not. I didn't want the fame that came from stabbing that piece of shit in the leg. And Mom didn't want it. We just wanted Dad back. And for everyone to leave us alone. But because some sniper shot my dad in the stomach, we were in the news. And because we were in the news, the worst church in America put us on their radar. And because I did what everyone in America wanted to do to Jeff Perkle, his church set up shop in our town and followed us and harassed us and filed 3 dozen lawsuits against our family. I found Mom in the bathtub a month later. She'd slit both wrists. I cursed softly and began to say something, but Parker wasn't finished. After that, you'd have thought the bastards would have quietly gone back to Omaha, but instead, they announced plans to protest my mother's funeral as well. So Mom's family had her cremated, and we held a small memorial service out of town. A local judge threw out all the OPP's suits against me on account of their being assholes, but they still didn't leave town. They showed up at my school and at my grandparents' house where I was living, and a couple months later, I went to live with my dad's aunt in Louisiana. Since then, I've changed my name twice and lived with 6 increasingly distant relatives who all inevitably get tired of my drama and show me the door. Aunt Marcy, she's really like a first cousin twice removed. She was my last chance. There are no long-lost cousins willing to put up with my shit. So she turned me over to youth services like she'd threatened to do 12 times. Thankfully, the OPPs lost track of me, but they'll never stop looking. Anytime they protest, you can usually spot a sign that says, "God hates Emily Bloom." Does anyone at school know about this? Aunt Marcy talked to Principal Denham before I moved to Hornby, so she knows, but that's it. She passed word down to the teachers that I've had a troubled past and they should give me some space, but no one knows exactly what my troubled past entails. Edwin Green, you can't imagine how shitty the last 4 years have been. But then, a few months ago, I met Garland, and one day, he told me about his parents making him live in the woods because of some crazy preacher. So I told him my story about stabbing a crazy preacher in the leg. That day, he offered me enough money to get away and start a new life. Just like that, with nothing in return. But I couldn't take it, you know? You can start over in life, but not if you leave things unfinished. Wait, so you are Hindu? Parker smiled and said, I'm not particularly religious, unless there's a religion that believes God overestimated his ability somewhat when he created man. Okay, I said. So before you took Garland's money, you wanted to do something good to make up for stabbing that preacher? Hell no, I'd do that again right now. To make up for killing my parents. Parker, you didn't kill your... I'm not arguing with you, Edwin Green. I had to do something good. Something for my mom, and something for my dad. So you're helping Garland find Madeleine, I said. And Parker said, no. I reminded Garland he was a hero. We're never going to find Madeleine. Parker stopped talking as a helicopter appeared on the horizon, followed by another, and then another. Do you think those are for us? I asked. Could just be a coincidence, Parker said, just as the Jason Bourne sirens roared to life all over town. Or maybe not, she said, and we took off toward Garland's hotel.